There's a particular kind of person who can't quite enjoy a conversation the way everyone else seems to. While the room moves easily from one light topic to the next, some part of their mind is still turning over something said 10 minutes earlier, still asking why, still refusing to let a passing comment simply pass. Other people call it overthinking. It rarely feels like overthinking from the inside. It feels like the only honest way to actually be present with a thought instead of skating across its surface the way most conversation seems to require. This is the particular psychology of the deep thinker, and it isn't simply a matter of intelligence, though intelligence often travels alongside it. It's a specific relationship to one's own mind, a refusal to accept the first, easiest answer, a discomfort with unexamined assumption, a pull toward the underside of things that most people are content to leave unturned. Socrates built an entire philosophy, and eventually paid for it with his life, around a single, uncompromising conviction that a life left unexamined isn't worth the living of it. He meant this literally, not as decoration. For Socrates, the failure to question one's own beliefs wasn't a minor oversight. It was closer to a kind of sleepwalking through the only life a person gets. What separates a deep thinker from someone simply prone to worry is the direction the thought actually travels. Worry circles a fear, repeating it without examining it, running the same loop until exhaustion finally interrupts it. Depth moves differently, outward and downward at once, following a question until it opens onto another question, willing to sit inside uncertainty rather than rushing toward whatever answer arrives. First, simply because arriving anywhere feels better than remaining unresolved. This tolerance for uncertainty is in many ways the actual engine of depth. Most minds want resolution quickly, because unresolved thought carries a kind of low, persistent discomfort. The deep thinker has, usually through some combination of temperament and hard experience, developed an unusual capacity to remain inside that discomfort far longer than instinct would normally allow, trusting that something genuine tends to surface only after the easy answers have been exhausted. Nietzsche, who understood the isolating cost of this tolerance better than almost anyone who's written about it, observed that a thinker who stares long enough into the depths of a difficult question should expect the depths to begin staring back. That genuine philosophical inquiry changes the inquirer, and rarely gently. This wasn't offered as a warning to stay away from difficult thinking. It was an honest account of its price. To think deeply about suffering is to be shaped in some small way by having genuinely considered it rather than glancing past it. To think deeply about mortality, about meaning, about the gap between how people present themselves and what actually moves them underneath, is to come away altered by the encounter in ways lighter thinking never quite manages to produce. This is part of why deep thinkers so often carry a reputation for melancholy, even when melancholy isn't really an accurate description of what's actually happening inside them. Aristotle noticed this pattern among the most original minds of his own era, remarking that an unusual number of exceptionally gifted individuals in philosophy, poetry, and the arts seem to share a tendency toward a certain kind of temperament, bordering on melancholic. He wasn't describing sadness for its own sake. He was pointing at something closer to sensitivity, a nervous system tuned finely enough to register what quieter minds simply pass over, and paying, in exchange for that sensitivity, a kind of emotional cost that comes bundled together with genuine perceptiveness. There's a real distinction worth making here, because it's frequently lost in casual conversation about what it means to think deeply. Rumination. The kind that traps a person in an anxious loop without producing any real insight. Looks similar to depth from the outside. Both involve extended time spent inside a single thought. But rumination repeats. Depth develops. Rumination asks the same unanswerable question in the same unproductive shape, over and over, without ever actually moving. Genuine depth, however uncomfortable, tends to shift the shape of the question itself over time, revealing new angles, connecting to territory the original thought hadn't initially touched. One drains a person without returning anything of value. The other, despite its discomfort, tends to leave something behind worth having gone through the discomfort for. Marcus Aurelius, writing privately rather than for any audience, treated this distinction as something to be actively cultivated rather than simply endured. He returned constantly, across years of notebook entries never intended for publication, to the discipline of examining his own impressions before accepting them, asking whether a disturbing thought was actually true, or whether it simply arrived with enough emotional force to feel true without having earned that status honestly. His famous observation that a person holds real power over their own mind, distinct from whatever is happening in the world outside it, wasn't a claim that difficult thoughts could simply be willed away. It was a claim that thinking, examined carefully enough, could be trusted to eventually locate something more accurate than whatever arrived first and loudest. This capacity for self-examination carries a specific kind of loneliness with it, and most people who think deeply eventually learn to expect it rather than resent it. Kierkegaard, writing from what he described as a profound and often isolating inwardness, observed that the crowd, by its very nature, tends to be untruth, not because groups of people are inherently dishonest, but because genuine, individual conviction gets diluted the moment it's filtered through collective agreement, smoothed down into something more palatable and considerably less precise than what an individual mind, thinking carefully on its own, might actually arrive at. The deep thinker often finds themselves out of step with the room, precisely because the room has, understandably, settled for a faster, more comfortable version of a conclusion that took considerably longer and cost considerably more to reach honestly. Solitude in this light isn't simply a preference deep thinkers happen to have. It's closer to a requirement, a condition their particular relationship to thought seems to actually need in order to function at all. Schopenhauer, whose entire temperament ran toward a fairly bleak assessment of most social interaction, argued that a person's capacity for genuine solitude tends to run in direct proportion to the value of their own inner life that people with little internal richness to draw from experience solitude as a kind of unbearable emptiness, while people with considerably more going on internally experience the exact same solitude as spaciousness, even relief. This wasn't an argument against relationship or connection broadly. It was an observation about where deep thought is actually produced, and it's rarely produced in the middle of constant noise. This doesn't mean deep thinkers are simply antisocial, though the reputation persists. It means their engagement with other people tends to be selective rather than constant, weighted toward fewer, more substantial exchanges rather than a wide, shallow network of pleasant but ultimately forgettable ones. Camus, writing from inside a philosophy built almost entirely around confronting difficult truths, honestly rather than looking away from them, suggested that in the depths of winter, he finally discovered within himself an invincible summer, a description less about seasonal metaphor and more about what tends to happen after a person has actually sat with genuine difficulty long enough to come out the other side of it. The depth wasn't avoided, it was moved through deliberately, and something durable was found only because the difficult passage wasn't skipped. There's a specific cost that accompanies all of this, and it's worth naming honestly rather than romanticizing away, because deep thought is often presented, especially online, as a purely admirable trait without any of its genuine downsides acknowledged. A mind that questions everything struggles, at times, to simply rest inside an easy answer, the way other minds seem to manage without effort. A person who notices the gap between what's said and what's actually meant frequently finds ordinary social performance exhausting in a way that's difficult to fully explain to people who don't share the same tendency. The deep thinker often envies, at least occasionally, the apparent ease with which other people seem to move through a world the deep thinker experiences as considerably more layered and considerably less straightforward. And yet this same tendency, uncomfortable as it often is to carry, appears to be the actual mechanism by which anything genuinely worthwhile gets produced in the realm of ideas. Nothing that required real depth to eventually reach was ever produced by a mind content to accept the first explanation offered to it. Socrates' insistence on questioning Nietzsche's willingness to look directly at difficult truths most people preferred to avoid, Marcus Aurelius' discipline of examining his own impressions before trusting them, Kierkegaard's tolerance for standing apart from the comfortable agreement of the crowd. None of these produced comfort in the short term. All of them produced something considerably more durable than comfort, arrived at only because comfort wasn't accepted as a sufficient stopping point along the way. Perhaps the deepest thing to understand about this particular temperament is that it was never really a choice in the way it's sometimes framed. Most deep thinkers don't select depth from among several available options. The way someone might choose a hobby, they simply find themselves unable to convincingly stop at the surface. The way someone with unusually sharp hearing can't simply choose not to notice a sound. Everyone else in the room has managed to tune out entirely. What looks from the outside like a deliberate intellectual stance is often, from the inside, considerably closer to a compulsion, a mind that keeps turning a question over long after turning it over has stopped being comfortable, because leaving it unturned feels, to that particular mind, like a much greater discomfort than the one currently being endured. This is worth remembering the next time a deep thought arrives uninvited and refuses to let go of an otherwise ordinary day. It isn't a malfunction and it isn't despite how it sometimes feels evidence of something wrong. It's the same mechanism that has, across centuries and very different lives, produced nearly everything worth reading, worth returning to, worth actually thinking about twice. The discomfort of depth was never really the price of thinking well. It was, more accurately, the sign that thinking well was already quietly underway. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe for more.